I had never imagined that a speck of dust could trigger the unraveling of my life. Yet, there it was, a tiny, inconsequential particle lying defiantly in the corner of our living room, heralding the start of my downfall. "You've been getting sloppy with your cleaning, haven't you, Miriam?" Ethan's voice sliced through the silence of our home like a blade. His eyes, once warm and inviting, now held a frosty disdain as they surveyed our living room. "You're a stay-at-home wife. The least you could do is get this right." His words stung, each one a sharp jab to my already fragile sense of self. I bit back the retort bubbling up my throat. Arguing with Ethan was futile. It only ever made things worse. I was a graphic novelist, a title I wore with pride, but one that Ethan regarded as little more than a fanciful hobby. My latest series, a whimsical tale of misfit superheroes, had started gaining traction, a fact that should have brought joy into our home. Instead, it brewed a storm. "You're getting carried away with these drawings of yours," Ethan had scoffed the night before, dismissing my excitement over a new contract. "Remember, your primary role is to take care of this house, not doodle in your notebooks." I turned away from Ethan, hiding the hurt that threatened to spill from my eyes. I had once believed that love was about support and understanding. But as I stood in our immaculately kept living room, a room now tainted with the bitterness of Ethan's words, I realized that our love had been replaced by something else entirely: contempt. The sound of Ethan's footsteps echoed as he left for work, each step a reminder of the distance growing between us. Alone, I glanced at the rebellious dust in the corner. It was absurd how something so small could signify something so significant. I should have been working on my latest comic panel, a deadline looming over me like a dark cloud. But Ethan's words echoed in my mind, drowning out the creative voices that usually filled my thoughts. With a heavy heart, I reached for the broom, the weight of my unspoken dreams heavier than ever. As I swept away the dust, a bitter realization settled in. I was living in a house that no longer felt like a home, married to a man who saw my dreams as nothing more than childish fantasies. The woman who had once believed in fairy tales and happy endings was slowly being eroded away, leaving behind a shell of who I used to be. But as I stared at the dustpan, something within me stirred. A flicker of defiance, a whisper of strength. I was Miriam, a graphic novelist, a weaver of stories. And this was not where my story would end. The days that followed were a blur of silent meals, cold glances, and a growing chasm between Ethan and me. Each day I toiled, juggling between the relentless demands of my graphic novel and the unspoken expectations of a perfect housewife. But no matter how hard I tried, it never seemed enough for Ethan. One evening, as I sat hunched over my drafting table, desperately trying to meet a looming deadline, Ethan's voice shattered my concentration. "Miriam, have you seen the state of the kitchen? It's a mess." I glanced at the clock. It was nearing midnight. My eyes, strained from hours of meticulous drawing, ached for rest. Yet Ethan stood there, his face twisted in annoyance. "I had to focus on my deadline, Ethan," I replied, my voice weary. "I'll clean it first thing in the morning." Ethan's laugh was scornful, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "A real housewife would have managed both. Your little drawings are getting in the way of your duties." I felt a surge of anger but swallowed it down. Arguing with Ethan was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Instead, I forced a nod and watched as he stormed off to bed. The kitchen wasn't a disaster. A few unwashed dishes, a couple of used pans, the remnants of a hastily prepared dinner. But in Ethan's eyes, it was a cardinal sin, a blatant disregard of my duties. As I scrubbed the dishes in the dead of night, my mind replayed the years of our marriage. Ethan, who once praised my artistic talent, now belittled it at every turn. The man I had married, the one who promised to stand by me, had morphed into a stranger, one who found joy in diminishing me. The next day brought no relief. Ethan's criticisms grew harsher, his patience thinner. A forgotten grocery item was treated as a personal affront, a slightly overcooked meal, a grave offense. "You can't do anything right, can you?" Ethan spat out one evening as he pushed away a plate of pasta I had made. "Can't cook, can't clean, can't even earn a decent living. What use are you?" His words, sharp and venomous, cut through me. I stood there, frozen, the hurt and humiliation festering like an open wound. This wasn't just about untidy kitchens or imperfect meals. This was about control, about diminishing my worth piece by piece. But amidst the hurt, a seed of resentment began to grow. I was more than Ethan's perception of me. I was more than a housewife bound by outdated expectations. I was Miriam, a creator of worlds, a storyteller. And it was time my story took a different turn. As Ethan retreated to the living room, his disdain hanging heavily in the air, I made a decision. No more would I allow myself to be belittled, my dreams trampled under the guise of marital duties. Ethan would see in time that I was not a woman to be underestimated. The tension in our house was like a thick fog, suffocating and inescapable. Each day, Ethan's criticisms grew more personal, more cutting. It was as if he relished in the power he wielded over me, his words designed to tear down rather than build up. One evening, as I was preparing dinner after a long day of drawing, Ethan arrived home early. His footsteps were heavy, his presence like a storm cloud entering the room. "What's for dinner?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Stew," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Ethan peered into the pot simmering on the stove and scoffed. "Looks like slop. Can't you make anything decent?" I bit my lip, fighting back the tears. It was becoming increasingly difficult to endure his relentless belittling. As we sat down to eat, the silence was oppressive. With each bite, I could feel Ethan's eyes on me, judging, assessing. Suddenly, he slammed his fork down, splattering stew across the table. "This is inedible, Miriam," he yelled, his face contorted with anger. "Can't you do anything, right? You're supposed to take care of me, but all you care about is your stupid drawings." I looked up, startled by the intensity of his outburst. "Ethan, please, I'm trying my best," I pleaded, my voice trembling. "Your best? This is your best?" He pushed his chair back violently and stood up. "You're a failure as a wife, Miriam, a complete failure." I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. They streamed down my face, a silent testament to the pain and humiliation I felt. That's when Ethan did something I never thought he was capable of. He picked up his glass of wine and threw it at me. The red liquid drenched my clothes, the shock of his action leaving me frozen in place. "You're pathetic," he sneered, his eyes cold and merciless. "I should have never married a useless woman like you." With that, he stormed out of the room, leaving me alone, soaked in wine and despair. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just a troubled marriage. This was an abusive one. I stood up, my body trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. As the initial shock subsided, a fierce determination took its place. Ethan had crossed a line, and there was no going back. I would no longer be the silent, submissive wife he wanted me to be. The time for meekness was over. It was time for Ethan to see the consequences of his actions. It was time for my revenge. The days following the wine incident were cold and silent. Ethan avoided me, only speaking to issue commands or criticisms. I felt trapped in a cycle of humiliation and despair, but a fiery resolve had taken root within me. I was determined to not let Ethan's cruelty break my spirit. One afternoon, while I was picking up groceries, I heard a familiar voice call my name. I turned around to see Mr. Harrison, my former boss and Ethan's current superior. His warm smile was a stark contrast to the icy atmosphere I had grown accustomed to at home. "Miriam, it's been ages," Mr. Harrison exclaimed. "How have you been?" The concern in his eyes was genuine. "Hello, Mr. Harrison. I've been, managing," I replied, forcing a smile. We decided to sit at a nearby cafe for coffee. The moment we sat down, Mr. Harrison's expression turned serious. "You don't look well, Miriam. If it's not too intrusive, may I ask what's wrong?" The floodgates opened. Words poured out of me, the insults, the wine incident, Ethan's growing hostility. Mr. Harrison listened intently, his frown deepening with every word. "This is not the Ethan I know," he said, shaking his head. "But I've noticed he's been off at work, too. Is there something he's hiding?" His question struck a chord. Ethan's late nights, his secretive phone calls, the sudden trips, it all made sense now. Ethan was hiding something, and I was determined to find out what. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," I said, a new sense of purpose strengthening my voice. "I think it's time I find out the truth about my husband." After we parted ways, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the brink of a significant discovery. It was time to confront the secrets Ethan had been keeping from me. That evening, when Ethan was out on one of his business meetings, I began my search. I started with his home office, sifting through his papers and files. And then I found it, a bank statement that made my heart sink. Large sums of money were being transferred to an account I didn't recognize. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together. Ethan's late nights, the secrecy, the money, it all pointed to one thing: infidelity. Armed with this information, I felt a sense of power I hadn't felt in a long time. Ethan had underestimated me, thinking he could carry on his deceit without consequence. He was wrong. I wouldn't confront him yet. I needed more evidence, something irrefutable. But one thing was clear: Ethan's time of playing the doting husband was over. The game had changed, and I was now a player. Armed with the revelation of Ethan's bank transactions, my determination to uncover the full extent of his deceit grew stronger. Each day I put on a facade of normalcy, biding my time while I meticulously gathered evidence. Then, one afternoon, an opportunity presented itself. Ethan, in his usual haughty manner, announced he was going on a business trip for a few days. His smug assurance that I would be fine alone was infuriating, but it provided the perfect chance to delve deeper into his secrets. As soon as Ethan left, I scoured our home for any additional evidence. In his study, tucked away in a drawer, I found a stack of receipts from a high-end jewelry store and a hotel keycard. The dates on the receipts coincided with the mysterious bank transactions. The weight of betrayal was heavy, but it fueled my resolve. I wasn't just a victim in Ethan's twisted game. I was the key player in his downfall. I decided to pay a visit to the hotel, posing as Ethan's wife, concerned about his lost item. The receptionist, after some hesitation, confirmed my suspicion. Ethan had been a frequent guest, always accompanied by the same woman. With my heart pounding and my hands shaking, I thanked the receptionist and stepped outside. The cold air hit me, but it couldn't quell the fire of rage burning inside me. That evening, as I sat alone in the house we once called a home, the full magnitude of Ethan's betrayal sank in. He had been living a double life, squandering our savings on another woman while treating me like an inconvenience. But my tears of hurt soon turned into tears of fury. Ethan had underestimated me, thinking he could control and demean me without repercussion. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. I began to plan my revenge. It wouldn't be rash or impulsive. It would be calculated, exposing Ethan for the liar and cheat he was. The next day, I reached out to a lawyer to discuss the possibility of divorce and the implications of Ethan's infidelity. I was met with sympathy and reassurance. My case was strong, and justice was within reach. I also contacted a private investigator to gather more concrete evidence of Ethan's affair. Every step I took was a step away from the broken, demoralized woman Ethan thought he knew. As the days passed and Ethan's return drew closer, a sense of empowerment enveloped me. I was no longer the downtrodden wife, but a woman reclaiming her life from the ashes of betrayal. Ethan's return would mark the beginning of the end of our charade of a marriage. I was ready to confront him, armed with the truth and the strength I had rediscovered within myself. The day Ethan returned from his so-called business trip marked a turning point. I greeted him with a calmness that belied the storm raging inside me. Ethan, oblivious to the seismic shift in our relationship, carried on with his usual arrogance. That evening, as we sat in the tense silence of our dining room, I finally broke the stillness. "Ethan, I know about the hotels and the jewelry. I know about her," I said, my voice steady but loaded with an unspoken threat. Ethan's fork clattered against his plate, his facade crumbling. "What are you talking about, Miriam?" he stammered, but the guilt was evident in his eyes. I pushed the stack of receipts and the hotel keycard across the table towards him. "I'm talking about your affair, Ethan. Your lies, your betrayal." For a moment, Ethan tried to maintain his composure, but then his expression twisted into one of disdain. "So what if I have? You've been nothing but a burden, Miriam. I found someone who actually appreciates me." His words were like daggers, but I refused to let them cut me. "Appreciates you?" I echoed. "Is that what you tell yourself to justify your infidelity?" Ethan scoffed, his true colors revealing themselves. "Justify? I don't need to justify anything to you. You should be grateful I even stayed this long." The conversation escalated, each of Ethan's words fueling my resolve. He tried to turn the tables, blaming me for his straying, accusing me of neglecting my duties. But I stood firm, the evidence of his deceit laid bare between us. "You're going to regret this, Miriam. Ethan threatened, his voice laced with venom. But I was undeterred. No, Ethan, the only regret I have is not seeing you for who you truly are sooner. The next day, I met with my lawyer, armed with the evidence gathered by the private investigator. The divorce papers were filed, citing Ethan's infidelity. I watched as Ethan's world began to crumble, the truth of his actions coming to light. Word of Ethan's affair and our impending divorce spread, tarnishing his reputation. His colleagues, once respectful, now looked at him with disdain. The other woman, confronted with the reality of her involvement in a married man's life, quickly distanced herself from Ethan. As for me, I found strength in reclaiming my life. The graphic novel that once seemed like a distant dream was now my reality, my escape. I poured my pain, my anger, my triumph into my art, creating a story that resonated with others who had faced similar betrayals. Ethan tried to reach out, to salvage what was left of his crumbling facade, but I was done. I had emerged from the shadows of our marriage, no longer a victim of his cruelty, but a survivor of his betrayal. The divorce proceedings were swift, the evidence against Ethan indisputable. Standing in the courtroom, watching him fumble for words, for once stripped of his arrogant facade, I felt a chapter of my life closing. "You can't do this, Miriam," Ethan had pleaded outside the courtroom. "I'll change, I swear. We can forget all this ever happened." But I was resolute. "It's too late for that, Ethan. I'm moving on." The judge granted me the divorce along with a favorable settlement. Ethan's protests were in vain. The man who had once held power over me was now powerless, his true nature exposed for all to see. With the divorce finalized, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was free from Ethan's suffocating grasp, free to pursue my life on my own terms. My graphic novel was gaining popularity, my story of betrayal and empowerment resonating with readers. Ethan's life, on the other hand, spiraled downwards. His professional reputation was tarnished, his personal life in shambles. The realization that his actions had consequences, that he was not invincible, seemed to finally dawn on him. But for me, Ethan was a closed chapter, a painful memory that had paved the way for my rebirth. I focused on my work, my art becoming my sanctuary, my voice. As I worked on my latest graphic novel, I realized that this journey had been more than just about revenge. It was about finding myself, about standing up against oppression and reclaiming my identity. I had once believed that my happiness was tied to Ethan, that my worth was defined by my role as his wife. But I had discovered my own strength, my own worth. I was not just Miriam, the graphic novelist. I was Miriam, a woman who had faced adversity and emerged stronger. In the final panel of my novel, the heroine stands tall amidst the ruins, a phoenix risen from the ashes. It was a reflection of my own journey, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. As I closed my sketchbook, I looked out the window, the world outside seemingly brighter, filled with possibilities. I had survived the storm, and now it was time to embrace the calm. Ethan was a part of my past, a lesson learned. My future lay ahead, unwritten and waiting. And I, Miriam, was ready to write it.